Quickly, I would like to thank you first for accepting to give us, to share with us your thoughts about business models innovation. And as I said, I would like to introduce Saul. Saul is my connection with Saul came through reading his book, The Business Model Innovation Factory. And it's a very nice book talking about how to become innovative in the market, how to start developing new business models, focusing on being a market maker rather than a share taker. And all these ideas I found them very interesting on two levels. The first level, at the School of Business, we're promoting entrepreneurship as one of the pillars of the school. And we're doing a lot of programs and courses for undergraduates and graduates, among other activities, to promote entrepreneurship in the form of an incubator inside the school itself. So I find this of a very big relevance to the school and to what we are doing and our mission. On the other side, I'm looking at it on the national level in Egypt. Over the past few years, we have gone through changes that were not expected and were not managed properly, and all of us are suffering from the effects of it. And our best effort is to do management of change, which is like adapting to what's happening. But reading through the book of Saul Kaplan, he gives us hope on probably we need to be thinking outside the box and looking at solutions and innovations of remodeling what we're doing. And that's why I approached Saul, and despite his very busy schedule with so many things, he accepted generously to give us this talk. Maybe I will just, so that I do not waste your time, I would like to introduce Saul. I will just briefly go through his bio. Saul is the founder and chief catalyst of the Business Innovator Factory, and this is something that he will explain in his speech. But I think the very interesting thing is he's the author of How to Stay Relevant Through the Business Model Innovations, and we have a summary of the book in case you're interested to take a look at it. Saul started the Business Model Innovation Factory in 2005 with a mission to enable collaborative innovation. And actually, it's a non-profit organization, and he's focusing on testing and exploring business models and system-level solutions in the area of social entrepreneurship, and that includes actually healthcare, education, entrepreneurship, and energy. So his scope is covering probably everything. And interesting enough, prior to focusing on the business model, Saul was working in the government, or let's say it's in the Rhode Island Economic and Community Development. He was the counselor of the government. And probably that is why I felt it in his book that he was a little bit frustrated of how things are going and how things are not connected to each other, which is a common complaint that we all have here. Again, he has another experience in the business sector in the pharmaceutical industry. He was the senior strategy partner in Accenture Health, and then he was in Eli Lilly and Company. He was the marketing plan manager. So he has the experience of the private sector and a very fast-moving industry, the pharmaceutical, as well as the government, with all its frustrations. Probably this is how he came up with this very interesting model, and we would like to hear some of the successful examples of business model innovations that you have been incubating. Thank you very much, Saul, and I will give you the word now.
Well, thank you. First of all, that's a very kind and long introduction. I appreciate it. It's a real pleasure to be with everybody, even remotely. I'm pleased to be with you and to share some of my thoughts on innovation, and particularly around business model innovation. A much shorter introduction to me. I often describe myself as an innovation junkie, and I'm betting that there are many among you in this audience. You know you're an innovation junkie when you always think that there's a better way. Innovation junkies, whether it's small things, when we're in line at an airport or at a supermarket, what are we doing? We're thinking about a better way for them to operate. We're trying to redesign or re-engineer the process. We do this with small things all around us. We drive the people around us crazy because we're never satisfied with the way things work today. We're always trying to change them. And it's not just the little things. Innovation junkies also focus on big things, too, that frustrate them. For me, it's the big things like our education system here in the state, particularly in our urban areas, but it's also our big healthcare system and our government systems at the state and federal level. Innovation junkies get frustrated not only with the little things around them, but also the big things around them as well. We always think that there's a better way. I think this is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you're always trying to make somebody's life better. You're always looking for a way to improve something for a customer, for a citizen, for a student, for a patient. And that's a real blessing. But it's also a curse for the same reasons, because you're never satisfied. You don't celebrate your wins very much because as soon as you accomplish something, you're immediately thinking that there is still a better way, and you're anxious to work on the next better way. So it's very anxiety-provoking to be an innovation junkie, and it absolutely drives all the people around you, your family, your friends, your colleagues at work crazy because you're always trying to change everything all of the time. So it's a blessing and a curse, but I think it's more of a blessing, and I wouldn't have it any other way, and I'm sure those of you listening, if you think of yourself as innovation junkies, that you would feel the same way. I'd like to share with you some thoughts that come from a very long and varied career in a lot of different settings, some thoughts about what innovation really means, how do we get below those buzzwords, and I'm particularly interested in not just the small incremental change that we make every day to improve things, but how do we think about transformational change or more significant change? And I think it's a very different process than the way we think about incremental change. I've been fortunate to be thinking about this and working in this space in several different contexts, as you heard in my introduction. I've been in industry where I've had responsibility for products and markets where I've really learned the difference between what I call market making and share taking. I've noticed that most of the people and organizations in the world tend to be share taking. They see the world in a fixed way. They see industries in a fixed way, and they view the way they compete in a stable industry as taking share, protecting share, or taking share from someone who's ahead of them. Most people think and act that way. Most organizations think and act that way, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I got very, very interested very early on in what I call market makers. Market makers they think differently than share takers. Market makers are people and organizations that don't accept the world and industry the way it is today, and they say we're going to create entire new markets, entire new approaches, ones that we can lead, and so they're not focused on share taking, they're focused more on market making. And I've done that not only in industry, but I've done that as a road warrior consultant working around the world with company leaders. And then, as Amir mentioned, I also had a chance to do that in a government setting. And it's always been the same for me throughout my entire career. Most leaders are share takers. They focus on how to do things within the context of their existing and current business models, and they try to do things a little bit better. better. They try to do things incrementally better. But I think we live in a time, in a world where, in addition to that, we have to get much better at transformation. We have to get much better at how do we completely reimagine the way our organizations and our communities and even ourselves as individuals deliver value to our customers and to the people that we interact with. So I'm going to share a couple of stories with you, and then I'm going to put some terminology and some concepts in front of you to help you think about this topic, and then we're going to open it up for discussion and talk about it in your context. I've lost the video from, I can't see you as I did in the beginning here, so I just want to check just to make sure that we're still, that you can still see and hear me. Can somebody confirm that?
Yes, I confirm we can see you and hear you. Checking the video.
Great. Okay, thank you. Sorry for that. So let me first share a couple of stories with you here. Let's see if I can get this slide to change here. There we go. I'm going to share two stories. The first story I'd like to share quickly. I oftentimes look for stories that come from the most unusual places I can find, because I really believe that if you're going to transform anything, the first step is to change your lens. If you are looking at your situation through your current lens, this is how your company works. This is how your industry works. This is how the university works. This is how your company works. If you don't imagine the world through a different lens, it's really hard to transform anything. So let me tell you a story that comes from outside the business world. This is a story that comes from nature, where I often look for examples to see what we can learn. So I tell the story about honeybees and something that's going on a lot here in my country, and I believe to some extent in your country as well, this thing called honeybee colony collapse. And it's amazing to me as I read about this that honeybee colonies are hugely important to the food that we eat. Some 90% of our food supply is dependent on having very vibrant bee colonies to pollinate, and when that's gone, a lot of our food supply is in jeopardy. And it turns out, at least here in the United States, depending on what you read, some 50 to 70% of the honeybee colonies have completely been wiped out. They call it honeybee colony collapse. And this isn't just slow evolutionary change that happens over a long period of time. This is literally one day there's a thriving bee colony, and the very next day it's completely wiped out and gone. And so I would ask you to think about the image of a bee colony and how a bee company is organized, because I think we can learn a lot from the way bee colonies are organized. If you think about it, a bee colony has a very corporate-like structure. The person or individual responsible for the bee colony is called a queen bee. There is one queen bee in every bee colony and only one queen bee. There's no one that questions their authority. They are completely and totally responsible for the success and well-being of every other bee in that colony. Sounds an awful lot like a lot of the corporations that we work in, doesn't it? The next level down in a bee colony are called drone bees. Let's call them management drones. There are a series of bees that have responsibility for different aspects of the way the bee colony works. Every management drone bee has a very clear and specific responsibility. There's no infighting. There's no power struggles amongst the drone bees. It's just very clear what they're responsible for, and it sounds an awful lot to me like functional leaders in our corporate structures, aren't they? You know, I'm responsible for manufacturing. I'm responsible for marketing. I'm responsible for sales. I'm responsible for HR. Well, bee colonies work exactly like that. And then, of course, in our example, the majority of bees in the colony are called the same thing in both places, aren't they? They're called worker bees. Right, and the worker bees in a bee colony are assigned to a particular management drone, and they do all of the work, and the success of the bee colony is mostly dependent on the effort of worker bees that do what their management drones and ultimately the queen bee tell them to do. Well, why do I share this story with you? Well, a bee colony is an amazing, amazing thing when it's working well. There's nothing in nature that's more beautiful than seeing a bee colony working at its peak performance. So what's happened? So all of a sudden, and you can read a lot of the scientific literature about what's causing these bee colonies to collapse. Some think it has to do with pesticides that we put into our food supply chains. Others think it has to do with a virus or fungus or maybe a combination of both. I don't know what's causing these bee colonies to collapse, but they are collapsing. Literally overnight, they are gone. All of these thriving bees are there one day and gone the next. So basically what you have is a structure that works incredibly well until something comes in from the outside and disrupts it, and these bee colonies have absolutely no way to deal with it. They didn't see it coming, they have no defense mechanism, and they're being completely and totally wiped out. I obviously share this story with you because I think a lot of our corporate structures are very highly functioning bee colonies. When they work well, there's nothing better. They perform well. They make a lot of money. They employ a lot of people. It's a beautiful thing until something comes around from the outside that they didn't foresee or expect. And I think we're seeing a lot more companies or corporate structures that are vulnerable to colony collapse the same way these bee colonies are. Let me tell you, let me switch to a story that comes from the business world. And it's a story that comes from a company and a set of companies here in the U.S. That I'm hoping you're familiar with. If not, I'll give you some of the detail here. But we had a very, very large successful company here called Blockbusters. Blockbusters was a company that ran these retail stores across the country where we could go to get a movie. At first, a video cassette of a movie, and then ultimately a DVD of a movie. It was a really, really great business. It had such a clear value proposition. It made the ability to get a movie and watch it in the comfort of our own homes possible. And it was a very, very good business. It printed cash for a lot of years. At the peak, there were almost 7,000 Blockbusters across the United States. Every single corner had a Blockbuster, so that when my wife called and said, "Would you please pick up a movie on the way home for the kids for the weekend?" I knew exactly what Blockbuster to go to, and most people here in the United States could actually picture those Blockbuster videos in their mind. Incredibly strong business model, a bee colony, a very high-performing bee colony until something happened. The disruption in this example happened because we figured out how to take a movie file and to compress it and to put it onto a DVD. Now, this was not some technology that you would have missed or that you didn't know was coming. You didn't need a big R&D department or a chief technology officer in your business to foresee that DVDs were coming, and it was clear it was going to happen. 10 years previous to this, we had compressed music files and put them onto CDs. So it was only a matter of time until we compressed a movie file and put it onto a DVD. Everybody saw it coming. Blockbusters had the same information that everybody else had. In fact, the only reason it took so long was because the movie industry here in the U.S. tried to block it. And this is what businesses do when they're concerned about being disrupted. Instead of figuring out how to create entire new business models, they try to prevent the disruption from happening. And so they passed laws, and this was a law that was challenged all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. But ultimately, the movie industry lost, and of course, we got DVDs. So what happened? Blockbusters, did what every organization does when a new technology comes out. And I'm sure that, what your organizations do when a new technology comes out. It's human nature. We took the technology, the DVD, and we tried to put it into our current business model to do it a little bit better. So what Blockbusters did when DVDs came out is they put them on the shelf right next to the video cassettes, and they thought they were innovating, and they thought they were being very customer friendly. They said, you can watch a movie in the comfort of your own home, and you can pick whether you want a video cassette or you want a DVD. And so they thought that they were being very innovative. Well, it turns out that somebody by the name of Reed Hastings founded a company called Netflix here in the United States. They didn't invent anything. And this is often true of disruptors. They didn't invent anything. All they did was take the same DVD that Blockbusters had on their shelf, and they said, hey, I don't need the store. I don't need the store on the corner. I can mail the DVD to you in your own home, right? And that was a great value proposition, and many of us started to take Netflix up on it. Blockbuster did what most big companies did. They thought it was a distraction. They thought it was a niche player that was never going to amount to anything. There's a great story where the leadership team of Netflix, the startup, flew to the headquarters of Blockbusters and said, you guys are unbelievable at store operations, and we're getting good at mail order operations. Why don't we partner? Why don't we combine our capabilities? And Blockbusters did what most big companies do. They laughed. They sent Netflix packing and said, you're a niche player. You're never going to amount to anything. Well, fast forward, what happened is that Blockbusters got Netflixed. I turn it into a verb. They got Netflixed by a startup company that invented nothing. They just came up with a different way, a better way to deliver value, and Blockbusters was so stuck on the way they were doing business that they were completely flat-footed like a bee colony when that disruption happened. And it's a very sad part of the story, but Blockbusters is now completely out of business. I mean, they got collapsed just like the honeybee colonies did. Billions of dollars of shareholder wealth, lots and lots of jobs were lost as a result of this Netflix coming along and changing the business model. And the last part of this story I'll share with you that I really like is, if you follow this at all, almost nobody here in the States receives their DVDs by the mail anymore. So Netflix, while they had the innovative business model that took down the behemoth, the big gorilla of Blockbusters, even Netflix has to create new business models and has to innovate, because today business models just don't last as long as they used to. So the real trick here is, how do you do R&D for new business models while you're still strengthening and protecting the current one? And I think that's the new strategic imperative. All of us are vulnerable to being Netflixed, whether we're individuals, organizations, or communities. And the only way to avoid being Netflixed is to proactively design, prototype, and test new business models, even those that might disrupt our current business model. Because incrementally improving your current business model, or trying to stop the competition with regulations and laws that will prevent them, from coming into the marketplace, might work for a little while, but they're not going to work for long. And in the 21st century, I think business models are going to be disrupted more and more. So I would assert that the new strategic imperative is how do we constantly explore and test new business models. So I would ask you to think about three questions as I go through the remaining part of some of the definitions and elements to think about here. The first one is, can you describe what your current business model is? Now, this might seem obvious, but the truth is that we don't talk about business models very much. We take them for granted, and that's because they haven't really changed. Business models in a lot of industries have been around for a very, very long time. This is the way a college works. This is the way a hospital works. This is the way companies compete, in the banking industry. This is the way companies compete in industry X, Y, or Z. And because we take it for granted and the business models haven't changed very much, we don't talk about it very much. But if you believe what I'm saying, that business models aren't going to last as long as they used to, we better really understand what our business model is so that we can set ourselves up for thinking about where the sources of disruption are and how we can explore and test new ones. So the second question, obviously, is your current business model sustainable? And a lot of executives will say to me, in our industry, the business model is very stable and isn't vulnerable to being Netflixed. I'm not sure that that's true. I'm sure there are differences from one industry to another, from one country to another, but I think it's a very unsafe bet to think that your business model in your industry isn't vulnerable to being Netflixed. I think they all are. And then thirdly, are you prepared as an organization to explore and test new business models? I don't mean R&D for new products and new technology to improve today's business model. I mean R&D for entirely new business models. So the good news, I think, is I get asked to give this talk a lot right now. If you're an innovation junkie, these are great times. This is our day. Innovators thrive during very turbulent times, when things are changing, when the environment is changing. Innovators are really important because leaders start to ask, they start to be concerned and worried about the potential disruption. So the good news is it's a really good time to be focused on innovation. The bad news is that we've turned it completely into a buzzword. I mean, it is a complete buzzword. Everything today is about innovation. Every conference I go to has innovation in its title. Every company has somebody that has innovation in their title. People are co-opting the word. And of course, if everything is an innovation and everybody is an innovator, of course, nothing is an innovation and no one is an innovator. I think we have to get below the buzzword of innovation. I'm going to offer you a very simple definition. When I talk to people, you talk to 50 people and you get 100 different definitions for what innovation is. I offer a very simple one. To me, innovation is just a better way to deliver value. Innovation is a better way to deliver value. To me, it's not an innovation until it actually solves a problem in the real world, until it actually delivers value to a customer. There's a big difference between invention and innovation. And when a lot of people hear the word innovation, what's really going on in their head is invention. It's creating a better mousetrap. It's a new technology, right? And I love invention. I like having all the new toys. I'm glad that we live in a world where there's a steady flow of new invention and new technology being invented. But if we're honest with each other, I think you'd have to admit that we have more technology available to us today than we humans and the organizations we live in know how to use. The problem isn't that we don't have enough technology or that we haven't invented the next great new technology or product. The problem is that we haven't figured out how to use the technologies and new inventions that we have to actually create new business models that solve the problem. And so I think we have to be focused on both things and very clear, what the difference between inventing a new mousetrap versus inventing a new and better way to deliver value. Netflix invented nothing. Right, they created a new business model or way to solve the problem for the customer. Many of the most interesting, huge, rapidly growing companies today, they really didn't invent anything. They just figured out a better way to deliver value. And then you wonder why the existing companies in the marketplace weren't able to do it. We could talk about Sony, versus Apple. I mean, Sony had all of the invention, right? They had the huge division that created all the new products and technologies. I'm old. I had a Sony Walkman for a lot of years. They had a big music division that had all of the performing artists in their domain under contract. They had everything within their organization to be able to completely change the way we access and enjoy music, and yet they didn't do it because they were so busy pedaling the bicycle of their existing business model that they weren't in a position to combine and recombine the parts in new ways to change the way value was delivered. And of course, that's what Steve Jobs came along and did. He didn't invent the MP3 player. I thought there were like 30 MP3 players out in the marketplace before Steve Jobs ever came along and Apple put the iPod into the marketplace. He didn't invent it. What he created was a new business model, a new way for us to access and enjoy music, and he just put the parts together in a different way, in a different business model, in a different system, and they caught Sony flat-footed, and Sony hasn't recovered from that to this day. And there's lots and lots of examples of companies that are so focused on invention and creating better mousetraps that they miss the point about entire new business models and ways to deliver value. So this is my one ex-consultant, kind of MBA chart in the presentation, but I wanted to share it with you because I think it's a useful way to think about the difference between incremental change and transformational change. Most organizations, when they think about innovation, they think about product and service innovation. Right? So up the y-axis on my chart here. How can I incrementally change my product and service offering, or how can I create that next breakthrough product? Because if we can invent the next breakthrough product, all of our problems will be solved. Many organizations also work on the x-axis, which I call capability innovation. How do I improve the capabilities in my organization, whether it's marketing or sales or logistics or human resources or what are the functions in my organizations? How do I do it better than my competition? So how do I create better products and services, or how do I create a stronger and more compelling capability set? Both of those things are great if what you want to do is improve the performance of today's business model. And you want to move up the leaderboard to take share away from your competition, or you want to protect share, your current market share within the industries you compete in. And I'm not trying to suggest that you shouldn't do all of those things. Of course you should do all of those things. But the job of the 21st century leader is to both pedal the bicycle of today's business model while at the same time exploring and testing entire new business models, or what I call new paradigm for controlling mice, in this chart. And as I travel around the world and talk to leaders about innovation, I see a lot of activity in the three quadrants, to the bottom and to the left and right, but I see very little activity in the upper right. And if you are going to avoid being Netflixed, you will never avoid being Netflix by creating a better mousetrap or creating stronger capabilities. You can only avoid being Netflixed by being out ahead in terms of exploring and testing new business models. I just gave a talk to a very large global transportation company that operates around the world and has the most incredible collection of business units ranging from large transit systems all the way down to airport limousine and shuttle services. They have all the parts to think about how we get from point A to point B. And when I spoke to them, I asked them how come they didn't invent Uber, which is the company I'm sure you've heard of, here in the States and now, trying to move around the world, that has a web-based program that enables us to share and to access a ride from point A to point B. And these young kids came out of college and have created a business that's worth a fortune now. And why didn't the big transportation companies create it? And the reason is the same reason Sony allowed Steve Jobs to do what he did at Apple. They were so busy working their current business model that they had no ability to play with new ones. And if they had, maybe they would be the company that would have created what Uber has created. So I talk a lot about business models, so I want to give you a simple definition for that. To me, a business model is just the story of how any organization creates, delivers, and captures value. A business model is a story of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. A lot of people, when they hear the word business model, they think just about the capture value part. They think about how do you sell, price, and charge people for the value that you're delivering. And that is an important part of the business model, but it's not the whole story. A business model has to describe what your value proposition is, what capabilities you've networked together to be able to deliver it, and yes, how do you capture value? A business model story connects all three of those things. I'm going to kind of complete the presentation part of what I'm doing. I want to give you, I'm going to use a top 10 list here to talk about why companies don't do this. Why do companies fail at doing R&D for new business models, exploring and testing new and different ways? So why are they vulnerable to being Netflixed or disrupted by a new startup business model that comes along? And I'll go through these here pretty quickly, and then we'll transition into some Q&A and application in your specific organizations and industries. So the first reason it doesn't happen, and the most important reason, is the CEO doesn't want it to happen. I see this a lot. No matter what the rhetoric is, what words the CEO uses about wanting to be innovative and wanting a culture where all their people can innovate, when you really scratch underneath the surface, there are a lot of CEOs down there who want everybody in the organization to focus on the performance of today's business model, and they don't want them distracted with creating an entire new one. They really don't want a new business model. They like the one that they have. They don't think it's vulnerable to being disrupted. They do believe it's sustainable, and they just don't want a new business model. And you know what? That's okay. When I talk to a CEO, I'd rather have a CEO who's honest about it than one who uses the buzzwords, but then at the end of the day tries to stop any activities that happen in the organization that relate to any kind of new or different business model. I think you have to be very clear about what the objective is so the people in your organization know what's expected of them. A lot of CEOs that I talk to, they understand what's going on. They see the threat of disruption, but their success is defined by the current business model. And they will say, look, the next CEO will deal with that, with creating a new business model, that for the remainder of my career, we're going to stay focused on driving performance in today's business model. That's frustrating for people in the organization that want to innovate and try different approaches, but at least it's clear, and at least it's clear when a CEO says, today we're going to stay focused on our current business model. I respect that. I like that. I don't think it's the right strategy, and I think more and more CEOs are going to be disrupted because of it, but at least it's clear. A lot of organizations that have grown up with a very proud heritage of being either a product company or maybe it's a service company in the financial services industry, where product and service is king. That's how we win. That's how we define ourselves. We're going to create the next best product. R&D to us is about producing the better mousetrap. And they invest all of the time and money in trying to grow by creating a more differentiated product. And a lot of companies have been very successful with that approach. The problem is that I've seen many companies that are excellent at creating new products that have been either Netflixed or are in the process of being Netflixed. Let's take Nokia for an example. I traveled to Finland a few years ago and talked with people. This was towards the tail end of Nokia being Netflixed. They showed me with great pride their product technology roadmap, their history of constantly creating better, more sophisticated, fancier products with stronger features and stronger capabilities. They literally could show me the roadmap, and they were so proud of the fact that they had created a cell phone that had the best camera of any cell phone on the market. Well, Nokia is gone. Nokia got Netflix, not because they didn't have a great product, but because they got beat by Steve Jobs and a different business model. So I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with having a strong product or service R&D function. I'm saying if you don't have a strong business model R&D function, you're going to be very vulnerable to constantly putting new products out in the marketplace while somebody else is putting an entire new business model into the market that will disrupt you. I'm going to pick on some of the components of large corporations that I think get in the way of business model exploration. I'll start with the CIO and information technology. So much of what we've done in information technology within corporations has been to make the existing business model more efficient. We've put in place enterprise systems that got all of the functions in the bee colony to work effectively together, to share information, to create standards of processes and workflows that could be executed more efficiently. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing because it created a lot of value and it helped a lot of companies compete and to take share away from their competition. The problem is that it's a straitjacket when it comes to thinking about entire new business models, because enterprise systems that CIOs have overseen are all about getting everybody to work in a very consistent way. They're not about combining and recombining the parts and playing with new ways to put capabilities together or new ways for information to flow. Sometimes CIOs can get in the way of that. I hear this one a lot. How often do you hear someone at the top of an organization say, I'm interested in business model innovation, I'm interested in transformation, I just don't want you to do anything that will disrupt our existing business? Right? So cannibalization is off the table. You can innovate, you just can't do anything that will hurt our current business. Well, if you do that, if you take cannibalization off the table, what you're going to end up with is limiting your innovation opportunities because someone else is not going to be constrained that way, right? So the hardest thing for leaders to do is to say, we're going to continue to strengthen our current business model, and this team over here is going to work on imagining and prototyping and testing entire new business models, even those that might disrupt our core business. Because if you don't do that, you're going to be vulnerable to being Netflix. This is much easier to say than it is to do for a lot of leaders. Number 6, nowhere near enough connecting with unusual suspects. We spend too much time in our offices. We spend too much time going to trade meetings with what I'll call the usual suspects. where people within the industry that we compete in all shop around and share the same stories over and over again. How do you learn anything new if all you do is meet with and talk with and look at practices that are going on in your own industry? We need to get out more, and we need to collide with more unusual suspects, because that's where innovation happens. That's where we learn about new capability sets. That's where we learn about new ways to put capabilities together to change the way value is driven. So we need to spend a lot more time outside of our existing silos. Let me pick on HR a little bit. So a lot of the human resource systems in our organizations, whether it's promotion or compensation, bonuses, base pay, all of this is designed to strengthen the current business model. Right? What do I need to do to be promoted? What do I need to do to get a raise? What do I need to do to get my bonus? All of those levers are all about the performance of the existing business model. I mean, how many times do you say to somebody, I'd like you to work on this special project? We're going to do something new and different over here. And when that person says, who's going to hold my pay card? Who's going to decide whether I'm promoted? And the answer is, well, your current boss, who's in the current business model, who's accountable for the performance of today's business model. It's really hard to get people excited about working on bringing ideas forward and playing around with new business models when the entire human resource system is designed to keep people safe and protected. I can't leave the CFO out of this conversation. What does the CFO do? If we're looking at multiple projects we could invest in, right? What are we likely to do? We're likely to pick those projects that have the best and most predictable chance of strengthening today's business model, aren't we? That's what we do. We're really good at comparing project A, B, C, and D using a very standard set of measures. We're very comfortable with that, right? What's the net present value? What's the return on investment? What's the payback time, for this to cover its initial investment? These are all great tools and approaches for incremental improvements to your current business model. You should be picking those that are most predictable and safest and investing your limited resource in those projects that have the clearest return. Business model innovation doesn't work that way, right? If the CFO asks me to put together all of those same financial analyses for a new business model idea I have, my honest answer is going to be, I don't know until I try it. Until I go out into the real world and prototype and test it, I really don't have any idea whether it's going to work. I have nothing to base it on. Now, I'll fill out your spreadsheets. I'll fill out your forms if that's what you make me do. I'll make up numbers in my spreadsheet to try to make it look like, this thing has some kind of predictable return to it. But the truthful answer is business model exploration at the early stage, right? You can't do that kind of financial analysis for. You have to be taking ideas, from a napkin sketch and saying, let's try it. Let's see if we can create value that way. And I don't know many organizations that are good at or have been capable of doing that. Number 9. What happens to the people in your organization that are crazy like I am, that are constantly coming up with new ways to change the way value is delivered, that work in a completely different way than the way your current organization works? What do we do with folks like that? Right? In most organizations, we shoot them. Well, we either shoot them, we push them off to the side, or they leave because they get frustrated. We're going to have to do much better at understanding that we need those types in our organizations. We need the people who are going to come up with entire new and different ways to deliver customer value, even if they don't work the same way that we're accustomed to, and that's hard to do. And then lastly, this notion of experimenting in the real world. Imagine coming to a lot of leaders in your companies to say, I want to take a napkin sketch of a business model idea I have, and I want to prototype it and test it in the real world, not in the conference room, not a consultant's deck, an actual experiment to know whether this business model is even feasible, whether we should even think about expanding it or trying to scale it. And everybody in the organization, looks at you like you're crazy. We can't do that. We can't, number one, you can't do it because you can't predict the results of it in advance. And number two, do we really want our competition seeing what we're doing, when we take it out into the real world? Well, you can't experiment with a new business model hypothetically. You can't experiment with it. You can't study and analyze it forever. You have to just take the idea out and you have to try it. And that's a very foreign idea for a lot of leaders. So I've just droned on for a while. Let's see, my time. I think I took the time that you had allotted to me to do it, and I'd like to leave time for reaction, discussion, questions that you might have. And I appreciate your allowing me to deliver these ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Saul. I think we enjoyed the speeches. I think the 10 reasons is part of the enjoyment of reading this book because it's probably common problems that we face everywhere. But maybe I think we have some representatives here, some of our engineers from the very leading healthcare provider in Egypt and the region, and probably you're doing a lot of innovation in this area as well, as I understand. So probably that would be, can we hear of some examples related to the healthcare sector where we can explore together, because we have some of the attendees here from the healthcare sector.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But did you? I'm going to need you to. If that was a question, can you restate it?
It's just that we have some participants from the healthcare sector, and I was wondering if you have examples of innovation in this sector that you have been promoting in the USA.
So, I mean, if I'm understanding the question, my perspectives on where this concept is in the United States?
No. I don't know. Shall I? No, my question was that we have some participants from the healthcare sector.
Yes.
And I understand you have done, or you are part of your area of activities of the BIF is the healthcare sector. So if you can share with us some examples.
Oh, sure. I've got it. I'm sorry. Questions about the healthcare sector. Yeah, this is one of the larger system areas that we work in. It's also personally for me, my home industry. I started in the pharmaceutical industry, and then when I was in consulting, I consulted with large pharma, medical products, and healthcare companies. So I'm very interested in transformation within the healthcare system. A lot of the work that we do there, consistent with the talk I just gave, is what does it mean to go from what we call here in the States a sick care system, one that waits until we get ill and sick and then tries to treat us. A lot of our healthcare system is centered on very expensive, intensive new medical technology, a lot of which is sitting in a hospital, which is very expensive. And as our population ages, it becomes harder and harder to pay for access to all of this new technology. So a lot of our work here at BIF is in what does it mean to go from a sick care system to a well care system? What would it mean if instead of a system that was designed around better mousetraps and technology and waiting until we were sick, one where we as consumers of healthcare or patients had more responsibility for living a lifestyle and taking better care of ourselves so that we didn't get sick in the first place. Very simple idea, but we have a set of business models that have built around our healthcare system, all organized, all incented, all compensated by the sick care system, which leaves no resource for, no focus or energy on the wellness piece. So we have been working for many years on what would it look like if we designed it as a well care system at its core. And we have real-world examples around the states, a project we're working on right now in Texas, where we're working together in the community with families, trying to understand from their perspective, through their lens, what it would take for them to take better care of themselves, ultimately decreasing their need and use of the higher cost interventions in the hospital. And we're starting to see some very, very interesting ideas, concepts, and hopefully we'll start to see some results from doing that. So there are leaders here in the U.S. that recognize that the current system is not sustainable and that they have to explore and test new healthcare models. And we've been trying to work with them and help to enable and catalyze that.
Thank you so much for a very well thought and delivered presentation. My name is Ahmed Sami, and I did work actually in different sectors in corporate America and the public sector, and also now I do private business. I just want to share with you that the best definition for innovation I've ever heard was innovation is turning an idea into cash. So getting to the bottom line of things. Also, I believe the innovation is to avail technologies, as you said, commercially to normal citizens. And I believe this is what we've all experienced in the example we've developed in the mobile business, how much we were paying for mobiles like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and how much we're paying for them now. And I would say that the best example in an industry is the mobile industry. Because look how handy and how mobile is the mobiles we are all carrying now. I don't think any of us, myself, I do my emails, I do my documentation, we do cash using the mobile. So I wonder if you agree with me in this area of turning whatever ideas in services, in processes, or inventions into cash. That's the true innovation. Thank you.
Can you or can somebody repeat the last part of that? So because I'm having a little trouble hearing it. Sorry. The question.
The question is that he's asking the new the proposed definition that he likes about business models is that business models is how to turn an idea into cash, innovation into cash.
Yep.
An idea into cash.
Yeah, so
capturing the value.
Yeah, so I would say it's to create, deliver, and capture value. So to me, it starts with what's the job you're trying to do for the customer, right? Based on the customer themselves. So instead of thinking about innovation through the lens of your organization, think about it through the lens of your customer. What's their experience? What's the job they're trying to do? And now how can you help them do that job better? And if you can do that unconstrained by the way your current business model works and think about that from with a clean sheet of paper, then you can start to think about potential new business models to do it. Not that you're not going to leverage the capability set that you have in your existing business model, but if you don't change your lens and think about it from the customer perspective, what you're going to end up doing is thinking about it through the lens of your company, and in the end, what you're going to do is you're going to incrementally change what you're already doing, right? And that's where you're going to be vulnerable. I mean, the problem that Sony had was not that they didn't have all the capabilities that to completely reinvent the music. It's that they were thinking about it through the lens of the way they were currently working, and they were not effective at taking capabilities, particularly those that lived in different divisions within their company, and saying, what if we combine them in a different way, with a different pricing structure, with a different proposition to our customers? And they didn't have the ability to see it that way. So I really think you have to look at this as ways that we can help the customer do the jobs they're trying to do better than they can do them today, and how can we help them do those jobs, and then, yes, how can we make money at it? Of course, we have to put the question about can we do it profitably and can we make money at it there? It has to be there, but that question has to coexist with how are we going to create new value for the customer and how are we going to deliver it, and to do that in a way that you think about it differently than the way your current business does, because you know that there are competitors out there that don't play by the same set of rules that you do and are thinking about it differently and are seeing that customer experience in a very different way. If I jump too fast to the third question about, how do I make money at it, before I've even figured out, whether the customer has a job they're trying to do that I can help them do, then the tendency is going to always be to do those things that I can predictably make more money at than what I'm currently doing today.
Maybe another definition that just crossed my mind now, and it grew from our experience in the Egyptian revolution. You're saying that innovation is a better way to deliver value. It could be also a different way, or a way to deliver a different value from an existing product. I take the example, we all here in Cairo remember during the revolution, there was a lot of people in the Tahrir Square selling goggles, diving goggles and snorkeling goggles. These you used to swim and to snorkeling, but they were using it to combat the police. And they created a big business out of it. Thinking out of the box is a massive skill. Yeah. Do you have other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Saul, for the very session. And I would like to ask if you can apply the business model how to development organization. Because some of us here have done shifts from private sector to development sector, and we also struggle that the development sector has never done a business model and they work without the concept of value, whether it is creation or delivery or capture. So do you have any insight on how we can apply the business models to development sectors, development organization?
Examples of business models that do what? I'm sorry, the last part? The audio is really bad.
Development sector or development organization?
Yeah, the audio, I'm sorry, the audio is not good. So I want to make sure I'm answering the right question. Examples of business models, and I'm missing the last part.
Apply to the development sector. Can we apply a business model to development sector?
To the government sector?
Development.
Investments?
Development.
Yeah, that's still not development.
Yes, development, exactly.
Development in what sense? Development,
whether it is with the government or social development.
So the social sector and development that in that way. Yeah, so when I worked in government here in the States, I worked in economic development and had responsibility for thinking about the local economy and ways that we could transform the local economy. I spend a lot of time thinking about this. We talked a lot, or I talked a lot, about a business model in the context of a company and its business model. I should expand that to answer your question to say all organizations have a business model. Whether they think they do or not, whether it's a university or a government agency, every organization has a way that it creates, delivers, and captures value, even if the way it captures value is through taxes. It's still a business model. And I think the most interesting business models today are networked business models that connect capabilities across these silos. So if you start thinking about economic development or social systems that have a piece that are private sector companies and public sector or government component or even a non-government, non-profit kind of sector, I think some of the most interesting business models are business models that think across those silos, across those boundaries. So a lot of the work we do is trying to create the conditions where we can play with capabilities that come from multiple organizations or sectors, put them together in a network to solve a customer's problem or a citizen's problem. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about that kind of social systems change. Of course, it's going to take leaders that are comfortable with and willing to allow that kind of exploration. So I often talk about trying to make business model exploration safer and easier to manage. You notice in my talk, I talked a lot about this notion of experimenting and prototyping and testing. I don't think you're ever going to transform any of these models or systems, particularly the social ones, right, in a big, kind of big bang type approach. I think you're going to experiment and explore and demonstrate that they can work. So we're constantly looking for places and leaders that allow us to play with that on a smaller scale, demonstrate it in the real world, and then to use that as the evidence that we should be thinking about ways to scale that and creating larger societal change. I think that's what it's going to take. We're going to have to get much better at exploring and testing, or R&D, for these new models, both in and out of the social sector. I hope that answered your question.
Good evening. Thank you very much for such inspiring and catalytic. This is a presentation. Now I understand what is the meaning of chief catalyst. Because I really got this, inspired and this magic. Thank you very much. Actually, you diagnose typically how the business case is, how the CEOs are thinking, how the innovators are pushed away. But what is the prescription? What is the recipe for innovators to survive?
Yeah, great. Yeah, great question. First of all, I'll make a comment. If you ever have the opportunity to create your own title, I highly recommend it. So I created my own here and call myself the Chief Catalyst. And I did that to remind me what my role is. I studied science as an undergraduate, and I remembered back to my high school and college chemistry classes where a catalyst is the reagent that gets the reaction started and then gets out of the way. And I think in the 21st century, leadership is about being a catalyst. It's no longer about command and control and telling everybody what to do like the queen bee or the management drones did in my honeybee example. I think it's much more about creating the conditions and enabling people to be their best selves and to be their most engaged and inspired selves, because that's when they do their best work. And so that's why I call myself the Chief Catalyst, because it reminds me of that. Plus, I also remember from the chemistry class that the catalyst doesn't get used up in the reaction, that it lives to be in subsequent reactions as well, and I kind of like that. The question about advice to innovators that live in organizations or in communities where there's a lot of resistance and people try to block and prevent innovation. It can be very frustrating for people that are in these places and organizations, and a lot of people will come up to me after one of my talks. They won't say it publicly during with the audience there because their bosses are in the room, but they'll come up to me privately afterwards and they'll say, "What do I do if I believe what you've said and I'm like you, but I'm in an organization where the boss doesn't want to do transformational things. They want us to focus on the current business model. They don't really want us to be disruptive within the organization." And I wish I had an easy answer for them. The best advice I can give them is, one, to ask their superiors to be clear about what their objectives are first and foremost. That using the buzzwords or coming in and banging your fist on the table and saying we want an innovation culture without any clarity on what we mean by that. I think anything you can do to get leaders to be clearer about the specifics of what they mean by that and what they want and expect from people in the organization, I think can help. But in the end, if leaders don't want to do it, particularly the transformational change piece, the business model change piece, that's not something you can do, at the mid-levels of an organization without permission of your bosses. That's not something you can do as a skunk works, that you can hide and keep quiet. Business model exploration requires, leadership support and protection, frankly, because the minute you start thinking about a new business model, everyone in the existing line organization whose responsibility it is to protect the current one will do their jobs. They'll try to protect the current one, which will mean they'll try to stop or block or end the innovation work. So I think you can try to make it as clear as possible, but a lot of people that are really committed to this kind of work, they end up trying to find the place where they can make a difference, or they resign themselves to doing the work they can do within the scope of the organizations that they're in. The good news is that there's more and more demand for people that are very creative and bring innovative, not just ideas, but innovation practices and ways to do this. So the need is growing. More leaders are starting to get it. So there are more places where you can do that. And then lastly, there are more and more in this country, there are more and more people that are working as a free agent that are working on projects that they like to work on with people that want to do similar work to them. So more and more people are coming out of the large organization institutional space and coming into the entrepreneurial, maybe I can start something myself, or more of a free agent, maybe I can work on a project basis. And I think you're going to see more and more of that grow as well.
Thank you Saul, for the presentation. I have a question.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. You said that. You said that innovation could possibly thrive during turbulent times. However, one could hardly know any information necessarily for the business by that time, and in many cases, building a successful business model necessarily requires acknowledging all the variables leading to success. So how would you say about that? What do you say about that? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't get I didn't get the heart of the question. Oh, I feel terrible.
Okay, my question is, you said that innovation could possibly thrive during turbulent times, but usually this is not the case. One can hardly know any necessary information in these times. So, in many cases, building a successful business model necessarily requires acknowledging all the variables leading to such success. So, am I right, or how can someone understand?
Does your question have to do with the use of technology and how technology is deployed inside the organization for innovation?
No, I just didn't understand. I just didn't understand what you said about that the innovation could possibly thrive during turbulent times.
Yeah, I don't know, Amir, maybe you can reframe it, but I didn't understand it.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Can you hear me, so?
Yep.
Yeah. The question is about, she's saying that you said that innovation thrives during turbulent times. You get it?
No.
No? Okay. She can write it down. It seems like a very complicated question. She will write it down. She will type it.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, really? That would be great. I mean, the problem is that the audio.
Okay. You said in the presentation that innovation usually starts during turbulent times. Like in Egypt, for instance, we have the political upheaval events happening throughout the country. Stop. Let me answer your question, okay?
She will write down the question. It's a very long question that cannot.
Yeah, and it's the quality of the audio that's making it very hard for me to understand. That's the problem. It's not your ability to ask the question, believe me.
No. بس كده ابعت لي دي بعدين اسالي السؤال يعني كملي. لا هو صوت خلاص.
Hey, Tori? Can you get me so that they could type? Isn't there a way for them to type something on there? Because I don't need the presentation anymore.
Okay, you said in the presentation that innovation usually thrives during turbulent times, right? But in many cases, during these times, one can hardly know any information that will be used to build a successful business model. Because if I'm going to build a successful business model, I have to have all the variables to build a model, right? So how would you take care of that?
So the question is about testing the new model, prototyping and testing?
My question is about how to make sure that you have all the knowledge that requires building a successful model. See what I mean?
I think I will interfere, Saul. I will pass this question.
I really feel bad about this. Can you type? Can this software? Can you just type the question there?
Yes, she already did. She typed the question, but probably you didn't receive it. And the question is basically about the innovation service market. Okay, she sent it. Send it now. Can you read it now?
Oh wait, there we go. So let's see. We can hardly know the message. So the initiative thrives during turbulence. Okay, now well, thank you. Now I can read it at least. Okay, yeah. Okay. So here we go. And please forgive me. So the innovation thrives during turbulent times, but during these times, one can hardly know the necessary information to build a successful. But yes, exactly. I appreciate that question. I have learned a lot from hanging around designers, and a lot of the people who work here at BIF are designers. I grew up as a scientist MBA, so everything was very analytical. Everything was sequential. MBA charts. You do this, then you do that, then you do that, and worked in large corporations where you never did anything until you studied them to death, and 18 committees had reviewed them. And that, again, as I said earlier, is fine if you're just trying to improve today's business model. I find that for business model exploration, that design thinking and process is more relevant, because if you watch how designers work, they're more generative, they're more iterative in the way that they do this. They prototype things, they take rough ideas with limited information, and they create the best prototype they can. They take it out into the market to see how customers would react to it and stakeholders would collaborate on it. And then if it works, then they polish it or fix it or change it. And in some respects, this is the way entrepreneurs work as well. If you watch entrepreneurs, I don't ever remember a single entrepreneur in all the years I've been doing this work that had their business model right on the very first try. Right? It usually takes 3, 4, 5 tries, 3 different versions of a business model until they land on something that is exciting and scalable and investable. But yet, what do we ask them to do? We ask them to write a business plan, to put down with as much certainty as you can what the business model is going to do, when we know that it's not going to work on the first try, right? We know it's not going to work on the first try, but yet we want them to fill out the spreadsheets as if they have perfect information. So I believe that the way business model exploration needs to work is more on a deep understanding of the customer's view and perspective. What is their experience? Even better if we have customers on the design team itself, right? Because who better to design solutions that will work better for them than the actual people who need those solutions? But with limited information, we should be comfortable taking a concept. I joke and say it should be a napkin sketch, but I'm not really joking. I mean, why can't it be a napkin sketch? I'm conceiving a new way to deliver value, right? And here's the way it would work if I sketched it out for you on a whiteboard or on a napkin. And then the next question should not be, how do we study it? How do we do analysis around it? How do we fill out spreadsheets? The next question should be, can I prototype and test it? What would it look like in the real world? Can I put something together that's very low fidelity, right, that is cheap and fast, that just allows me to demonstrate that that model could potentially work in the real world, and then to iterate and scale from there. So this is a big difference from the way we learn in business school how to do this, right? Because the way we learn in business school to do it is through analysis, right? It's through gathering the information that will allow us to make a good business decision, right? And then we build organizations around how we make those decisions and decide which things we should and shouldn't invest in or not. I don't think business model exploration works that way. I think it works with getting more comfortable with limited information and taking basic information and creating a concept that I can take into the real world and test it. So I'm sorry it took me so long to understand the question, but I hope that answers it for you.
Thank you very much, Saul. We appreciate your time and we appreciate sharing with us your thoughts and ideas. And I think this is, as I was saying today to my boss, that this is a very nice book to read. It's easy to read and full of new ideas. And actually, he's very happy that I'm reading. So now I'll be promoted because I read your book. Thank you so much for your time and for accepting to address our team with this nice speech, and we look forward to other opportunities that we can meet again.
Well, it was my pleasure to share some ideas with you and interact a little bit, and I hope you find them helpful. Good luck with your exploration.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Quite welcome.